I'll say good afternoon to everyone. Welcome to our work session today. We've got just one item on the agenda. So again, good to see everybody. Good afternoon. Welcome to those that are both here with us in the room and that are here virtually as we continue our transition back into our face-to-face board meetings. Starting off today, we've just got one item, perhaps one that we expect a good bit of discussion, and that is the reopening school update. So Superintendent Moore, we'll turn it over to you.
Thank you.
You're driving today.
Good afternoon, Chair Sutton and board members. I'm going to spend a good bit of time this afternoon going through a number of topics related to school reopening and for in-person instruction, and leaving time for discussion and questions and comments as well at the end. Our school reopening presentation is broken into 3 sections, and I'll briefly lay that out now so you have a very high-level roadmap as we go forward. The first section, which is the longest, reviews some of the details in pictures, words, and video about what families and staff can expect when classrooms begin reopening to students this coming Monday. Much of the information we are sharing today has been shared and is being shared daily by schools directly with their families. We have gathered it in one presentation today for everyone's convenience. In the second section of this presentation, we will provide our assumptions about second semester schedules we expect for each grade span as of today. As we are painfully aware, it's impossible to know exactly what state guidance or health conditions we will face come January. But we know enough now that we can share our planning assumptions with you for each grade span. And our final section today will continue that discussion about second semester with our plans for Virtual Academy. While it is a somewhat lengthy presentation, we ask that questions be held to the end if at all possible. This is to accommodate the many parents and teachers that we also know are watching today's meeting and those who will watch the recording once the meeting concludes. And there will be ample time for questions as we get to the end. So let's start first with the overview of the plan that we are currently using as the first group of students return next week on October 26th. On September 23rd, you as the board adopted the start dates for return to in-person instruction as noted on this slide. Our K-12 regional programs will begin a 3-week rotation on Monday, October 26th, and then transition after one cycle of the 3-week rotation to daily in-person instruction. Our pre-K to 3rd grades will also return on Monday, October 26th, first in a 3-week rotation by cohorts, and then after one cycle of the 3-week rotation, they will return for in-person instruction on a daily basis. For grades 4 and 5, they will begin on a 3-week rotation on November 16th and remain in a 3-week rotation for the remainder of the semester. Our middle grades, school grades, 6 through 8, will return for in-person instruction beginning on November 9th. They are scheduled to start in a 3-week rotation and will continue in this model for the remainder of first semester. For our community's awareness, updated calendars have been uploaded in our WCPSS website so that they can access them there. This slide illustrates the return to in-person instruction for the different grade levels as we just discussed. It is based on the traditional calendar, though. It highlights the beginning return date, the rotation cycles, and the daily in-person schedule. One specific item to note when reviewing this illustration is the alignment of cohorts on rotations across grade levels. The middle school 3-week rotation will align with grades 4 and 5 rotation to ensure that siblings are attending school at the same time. The previous slides provided information about when students will return to school. Now I want to provide more detail on how the instructional day will look. We discussed earlier in the year what students will receive in terms of live, synchronous versus asynchronous instruction. Specifically, we shared that full-day instruction for daily in-person and in-person rotations. So if it's your in-person week or if you're daily in-person, full day. Minimum baseline of 5 hours of live instruction per week while in remote instruction, the remote rotations. It's a little bit less than what you did when you were fully remote. A baseline of 2 to 3 hours of live instruction per day in the virtual academy. Overall, this translates to about 25 to 30 hours of live instruction or activity over the course of a 3-week period when you're looking at rotations, whether students are in Plan B or actually even in the virtual academy. In many cases, our teachers are exceeding these baseline expectations. It's been a sort of mixed bag there in terms of that reaction. At the same time, however, we continue to focus on ensuring a common baseline for synchronous and asynchronous instruction to make sure that it's consistently provided among schools across the district. When we began this journey, we talked about Plan B and Virtual Academy as completely separate entities. In reality, as our schools have explored creatively how to best serve students, these have become more fluid and overlapping. For example, in some cases, we will have Plan B and Virtual Academy students in the same class. In some cases, our teachers will provide instruction to both simultaneously. In some cases, students who are in person but have a need to be quarantined or experiencing illness may need to shift between settings. To be clear, while we have established this baseline, specific structures and experiences will be different across schools. Our schools have done a great job at being fluid to fill gaps and find ways to best serve students. As we continue with students returning to school, staff will continue to make adjustments based on feedback and experience. They will continue to share best practices so that we can learn from each other. We are evolving, but we are doing it with a common baseline, and we are doing it together. As a part of the return to in-person instruction, additional remote learning asynchronous days were approved and are shown on this slide. As a reminder, the dates on the left-hand column were identified prior to the start of the school year and are being implemented in response to legislation that requires all districts to include a minimum of 5 remote learning days in the calendar. WCPSS is adding additional days to ensure 1 day per week through the first semester. The remote learning asynchronous days will allow students and families some flexibility to take a break, reduce screen time. It'll also allow teachers to work in their PLTs to continue to support student learning across in-person, remote learning rotations, or virtual academy, as many of our teachers will continue to support students in all of these modalities. We have anticipated our students' return, and we look forward to welcoming them back on October 26th. The next several slides you will see are designed to give you insight into the preparations and simulated practices as our staff welcomes our students back in person to their school buildings and classrooms. We recognize that principals have been working through the Reopening Guidance for Schools, October 2020. Creating protocols, practicing them with staff, and sharing with their school community. This detailed, comprehensive checklist is the framework for the school reentry plan, outlining the required components of preparation for which principals and school teams are determining protocols, preparing the facility, outlining the needs for learning and teaching, and how to support teachers as they set up their plans for their own classrooms. The notebook that you see up there is literally a school taking the checklist and the work that they have done to prepare in each of the areas that's required for the checklist. In order to ensure that all staff are familiar with those protocols and expectations, which is some feedback that we've been hearing, we have asked principals to explicitly review and dialogue with their teachers around all of the elements outlined in the reopening guidance for schools checklist, that schools ensure that staff know the details of the plans, where to find answers to questions. We know that schools have been practicing protocols, and so we have asked all schools to try to finish their practice of protocols by the end of the day on Wednesday, October 21st, if they've not already done so. However, Friday, October 23rd is a teacher workday for many of our traditional calendar schools, and Friday may need to be used by some schools to either practice a protocol or to do a second round, perhaps, because of the availability of staff on the campus and not having to interrupt remote instruction in order to practice the protocols. So we have asked them to complete these by Wednesday, but we have to leave the door open for the possibility of some of it happening on Friday as well. There is a checklist form that will be submitted by principals to their area superintendents indicating that each area of the plan has been addressed. In addition, our local NCAE president, Kristen, has been in contact with our communications office about how to implement perhaps some kind of teacher self-report plan that will allow school-level administration to quickly respond to building-level concerns and provide an opportunity for area superintendents to be apprised of concerns in the schools they supervise so they can follow up as well. SLT members will be visiting campuses this week. Every elementary school will receive a visit this week. To support schools, make sure that they have what they need as we prepare for the return of in-person instruction. Beyond this week, staff is finalizing a plan that will support progress monitoring in the implementation of school-level protocols. Our target is to visit about 30 schools a week, gather information that supports the strong implementation of the safety protocols in support of teaching and learning, and with the priority of building confidence, keeping our staff and students safe, and identifying those areas of need that have to have some follow-up. As another effort to listen and be responsive, staff is working on a formal way for teachers and school-based personnel to be able to report anonymous concerns. Any concern about the implementation of safety protocols, but also the opportunity to provide affirmations or celebrations of safety protocols and work in the building. We acknowledge that teachers, staff, administrators, and families are both excited and concerned. It is important that we say and show that the WCPSS is committed to building staff and community confidence, being responsive, so that we can have a safe return to in-person instruction. So let's look at a few examples. As you see here, this is West Millbrook Middle, along with all of our other schools, have been practicing protocols and procedures. This picture illustrates how, upon arrival to school, our carpool students will be screened before or as they are exiting the car. Students will be asked a series of health screening questions and have their temperature checked. Those students who do not arrive to school in carpool will also be screened, bus riders and walkers. All schools should complete at least one practice of this arrival and screening protocol, as we have mentioned earlier, by the end of the day tomorrow, with the option to also use Friday as a teacher workday if necessary. Schools may choose or need to complete more than one set of practice protocols to ensure that staff understand the process, work out the kinks, etc. School staff will be present to assist in conducting the health screenings as students arrive. We have also deployed a survey, I'll talk more about that in a little bit, to have central services staff assist at schools, potentially with the screening process. This next slide shows the touchless thermometer that will be used for screening, as well as the expectation for a student when on campus to be wearing their personal face covering. With the emphasis placed on the consistency in wearing face coverings and the 3 Ws in general from both our state and local health officials and the ABC Scientific Collaborative, We know the importance of face coverings in slowing the spread of COVID-19. We have worked hard to create a culture in which it is expected, and in cases of noncompliance with staff and students, we have implemented accountability processes. Our district has created both a staff and student accountability plan that outlines these processes. For the student and family accountability agreement, the purpose of the signature page for this required form is similar to the purpose of that's in the student parent handbook. As a best practice, it was recommended with our attorney's guidance that schools collect the signature page so that parents, guardians, and students acknowledge receipt and understanding of the expectations centered on our 3 Ws. However, a family not submitting this signature page does not automatically prevent them from attending school, provided that the students meet all the expectations noted in the student accountability document. If they are practicing social distancing, if they are wearing their mask, if they're complying with all of the things that we have set out as expectations, not having the form signed requires a follow-up with the family to get the form in. But the student is complying with all of the expectations. If a student shows up without a face covering, they do not have a face covering accommodation request that has been approved, or they are not following protocols, they will be given a face covering so they can meet our expectations. We will have conversations about the importance of following protocols. If they refuse to wear a mask or refuse to follow those safety protocols, they will not be allowed to attend school in person until the student and family agree to abide by the expectations, or have their face covering accommodation request approved through the process in place. Students who do not pass the daily health screening should be offered a face covering if they do not have one. Every kid will be offered a face covering if they don't have one. An employee must escort the student to the care center, preferably staying outside of the building and using the entrance closest to the care center to minimize the amount of time and distance traveled inside the building. An employee will stay with the student in the care center until their parent or guardian arrives to pick them up. The employee must keep the student under visual supervision while remaining at least 6 feet away from the student. The employee must wear a face covering. If the student doesn't have one, again, we will give them a face covering to wear. Employee will call the student's parent or guardian to have them immediately come pick up the student. The principal will notify WCPSS Health Services, and they will assist the principal in notifying Wake County Public Health if it is required. As recent as Monday, you were notified by our attorney, Jonathan Blumberg, that we have received updates with regards to the DHHS guidance on how to respond to answers during the screening process. We will be updating our guidance and will keep you informed. As you can see, staff need to be screened as well. Currently, staff have an option to complete their health screening in person at the work site or to use an online screening tool to self-report the answers to screening questions and report their own temperature. Staff members who do not use the online screening tool before they arrive to school will be screened on site by other school staff upon arrival. All this applies to central services as well. If staff uses the online screening tool, they will get an email notification indicating that they have successfully completed the screener. An example of the notification is shown on the right hand of the slide with the big green check. If, however, a staff member does not pass the screener, they will receive a message directing them to contact their immediate supervisor, who will then work with the individual through the next steps and processes. In addition to a list of individuals who did not pass the screener, supervisors will get a list of all staff who screened so that they are aware of everyone who completed the process. Many staff members have been reporting to school buildings routinely, while others are just beginning to report this week. We have been able, by way of an update, to approve 84% of the 1,875 school-based requests for telework from employees who are high risk or living with someone who is high risk. So 84% of those have been approved. If you look at just the high-risk employees, 91% of those have been approved. A small percentage of employees who have been teleworking through an approved HR or modification, accommodation or modification, are now needed to report to school and work sites because their essential job functions must be performed on site. Additional accommodations provided on site are also available. This could include PPE beyond face coverings and face shields that employees received. It could include items such as gloves or gowns. Schedules and duties can also be modified on site. For example, employees who are high risk but need to be in the building may receive a change to their supervision duties to minimize close contact with large groups of students. In some cases, the way certified instructional support staff deliver services can be modified to minimize contact with large groups of students. For example, a counselor who typically goes into classrooms to deliver lessons may be able to do that remotely from an office and then be available for follow-up with individual student needs as is called for. While HR has now substantially cleared the original accommodation requests that were placed, some do continue to remain in what is an interactive process that goes back and forth in multiple conversations to come to a conclusion or decision. And we continue to receive dozens of requests daily. At this time, emphasis added, our staffing data remains stable. We have previously provided an update that we had fewer resignations from January through August of this year as compared to the same time last year. For the months of September and October so far, we remain stable, receiving 116 resignations in September as compared to 121 last September. It's about the same. In October, thus far, we've received a few fewer resignations, 46 through the 15th, which is 3 fewer than last year's 49. Reviewing vacancies is another way to look at our staffing. We continue to remain stable here as well. As an example, with over 1,000 4th and 5th grade teaching positions, we have 9 vacancies district-wide. It's a 99% fill rate. HR is monitoring this staffing data regularly. We have launched an early hire campaign on our website and other external websites to build a talent pool of educators who are available now as well as in the near future so we can support schools with staffing needs. We are aware that as we get closer to students in the building, we need to continue to monitor data around retirements and resignations so that HR can support schools in their needs. While we welcome visitors, North Carolina DHHS guidance restricts visitors to just those that are deemed essential: parents, maintenance, delivery, and other trained volunteers. Essential visitors will be greeted outside the building, where they must also pass the health screening that includes the temperature checked. Essential volunteers may also be utilized. A survey has been distributed to match central services employees, I mentioned this earlier, with schools to support needs at the school sites, such as health screenings, student supervision, food delivery, or receptionist support. While some employees from our CNS and transportation departments will fully or partially return to their previous responsibilities, others will fully or partially remain at schools to support FAST and FAST 2.0. We'll get to that in a bit, as well as other needs at the school site. Principals will communicate additional needs for parents and community volunteers through their regular communication channels. And this is an important note that we've been asked several times about. volunteers who received clearance previously to be volunteers in our buildings continue to be eligible and will not need to re-register as a volunteer this year, as we are conducting continued and frequent checks for those who are already in our volunteer system. Principals may request to have additional volunteers, new ones, cleared through HR as need arises. Schools have designated entry and exit points, as well as other directional signage, in order to minimize contact and to reinforce social distancing. It will be important for staff, families, and visitors to be on the lookout for this directional signage when visiting school facilities. As you can see here, hand sanitizer stations have been installed, and they are throughout our buildings, in high traffic areas and classrooms. To speak to the expansive nature of this project as an example, Millbrook High School has had 150 hand sanitizer stations installed. This is in addition to the gallon pumps that are in every classroom. Instructions for using the station have been posted in order to ensure proper use. You will also note the availability of gallon-sized hand sanitizer bottles delivered to our schools for common areas such as this main office space and for classrooms. Additionally, in common areas, students and adults are reminded to maintain social distancing with signage such as this, which is, I believe, South Lakes Elementary. In many schools, high traffic areas are designated with one-way directional signage to reinforce social distancing. Here, you see signage that reminds students and staff of the proper use of water fountains, which is only to fill water bottles. Occupancy signs in common areas, such as restrooms and the cafeteria, remind our students and staff to be aware of the number of people around them in order to maintain a safe social distance, as well as to make decisions about whether or not they should be using the space so as not to exceed the maximum occupancy. Schools have designated entry and exit points, as well as other directional signage throughout their buildings: hallways, restrooms, entrances, exits, stairwells, other common areas, in order to minimize contact and to reinforce social distancing. Signage may be placed on floors, walls, large banners to serve as reminders about appropriate protocols. If you've been in our schools, you know that the signage is there, and some of our schools have a lot more signage than others just because they have wider hallways, more spaces, different flow in the building, and have determined that they wanted to put additional signage, more than really is necessary, but some of them have it. Essential PPE and supplies, gloves, masks, face shields, bottled hand sanitizer, cleansing wipes for technology devices, approved cleaning products, and signage have been delivered to schools. The picture on the right shows a compilation of these items. As of this afternoon, we have verified that all elementary schools, as well as middle and high schools with regional programs, have all of the cleaning supplies delivered for distribution to their teachers. The distribution will happen by the end of this week. In addition, for specialized areas and classrooms, additional disposable gowns, face shields, clear masks, and gloves have been provided. Staff can view the list of PPE and supplies that should be available at their school in the Return to Workplace Guide on Wake Connect. For families who might need to learn how to adjust the state-supplied face coverings, directions, pictures have been posted online at wcpss.net. Thank you, Board Member Mahaffey. We are developing a monitoring tool for principals to get teacher feedback on a regular basis about their PPE and supplies that they have on hand. This was the collaboration that I talked about earlier with our local NCAE folks. And this would be input about PPE supplies and compliance around protocols being followed in the building. As I mentioned earlier, in addition to the monitoring tool that principals will use, SLT will be the folks who will be visiting 30 to 40 schools per week as a part of the progress monitoring process to understand and support needs and check on how compliance is working in our schools with regards to the safety protocols that have been established. And then also, as I mentioned earlier, we will be standing up an opportunity for any staff member who has a concern or an affirmation about what is happening in their location to provide that feedback anonymously. We're going to start it up as a pilot and see how it works, see what kind of feedback we get, where it goes, if it addresses a gap from something that we're asking in another form or way, and we need to change that piece. If there's something in what we're monitoring when we go out to schools that we're missing that we need to check. So I think that it can help provide an opportunity to see the gaps. We'll see how much it is used. We are going to need to know what school or department we're talking about so that we know where to follow up. But we are working on that and plan to have it deployed and ready by next Monday. Our teachers and other school staff have been busy preparing their socially distanced spaces to welcome students. You see here a kindergarten classroom at Buckhorn Creek Elementary School in the process of being set up. We are preparing social distancing with as much distance as is practical. Grades 4 through 12 will require social distancing of 6 feet. Grades K through 3 will have 6 feet of social distancing in the rotations and as much social distancing as practical with the goal of 6 feet once we return to daily in person for Plan A. If a principal or school needs help or a teacher needs help with K-3 socially distanced classroom layouts, there are places that we have provided some guidance. There are documents around social distancing for elementary, middle, and high. There are social distancing occupancy spreadsheets available, square foot calculations for classrooms and buildings. There are room layout examples, how furnishing can be arranged. Principals will contact either their area superintendent or Elizabeth Sharp, the director in facilities planning and design, if they need more support. We have heard from a number of schools and teachers about needing to change out the equipment in their room. In particular, 2-person type desks for individual desks. Those requests are being gathered. They are in process. The district does have a large supply of individual desks on hand. And I have to just pause for a moment here, little tear around all of the work that we have done to establish collaborative spaces in our building and ways for kids to work together that we are having to sort of move around and now move back towards individual desks in order to accomplish social distancing in our classroom. We know that it's important and we know that it's necessary, but there is a little tear there. So. Another example here, this one is Wakelon. Desks are spaced apart in order to maintain social distancing between students. Something else that you will note is that group tables and center stations tend to have been removed in most places, which is also kind of sad. Centers, right? The staple of elementary. Another example of an elementary school that maintains social distancing, this is Millbrook Elementary School. The layout of the classroom also takes into consideration safety of our teachers, noticing again the absence of large group tables and small group centers. Special note here that in specials such as electives like art, music, and PE, where singleton teachers interact with multiple groups of students, specialist staff may choose to go into core classes rather than students transitioning from class to class in order to reduce interaction across student cohort groups or in common areas. In some instances, a specialist teacher may also teach virtually from their classroom into a core classroom. Finally, elective teachers could even cohort with specific grade levels if there's more than one, and share teaching responsibilities that way to ensure they interact with smaller groups of students. Each school has designated and set up a care center in order to be prepared to care for students who are experiencing illness during the school day. To reinforce the health and safety of our students and staff, students will wait for someone to pick them up from school if they do not pass the health screening. The care center is not the health room. The health room is reserved for medication administration and or to assist with students who are not experiencing COVID-19-like symptoms. Any student experiencing an illness would be escorted by an employee directly to the care center for assistance, not to the front office necessarily, depending on where they're located. Schools will have at least one employee staffing the care center anytime a student is in the care center. I mentioned this earlier. Care center attendants will be required to complete a training module in Learning Central and pass a check by a school nurse in order to serve as a care center attendant. School nurses will be expected to assist in the care center when working on site, but they're not responsible for the constant supervision of students, and as you know, our nurses are not fully on site every day at every school. We have an average of one nurse for every 2 schools. I want to pause and acknowledge the reality of our schools and the district being impacted by COVID-19 positive cases. We acknowledge and respect the anxiety that this reality may cause in our school community. This reality causes us to make sure that we are taking every possible measure to reduce the risk and to respond promptly to any confirmed case. When students are attending school in person, the school will notify parents and employees via email and text when the school is notified that someone confirmed to have COVID-19 was in the school. When students are not attending school in person, like during the week of Thanksgiving, winter break, or high schools that currently don't have students attending, the school will notify the entire school community of positive COVID-19 cases only in the following instances. When individuals cannot be readily identified through contact tracing, meaning we know there's an exposure, but we don't know who it is, so we got to get the message out to check. When health officials determine 2 or more positive cases likely resulted from an exposure at a school, which might happen, as you know, that we do have, even in our high schools, some students are returning to campus for some activities. And of course, our teachers are there. We will not notify the school community about suspected or confirmed cases in individuals who have not been on campus. We will also not notify the school community in instances where health officials determined through contact tracing that everyone followed the 3 W's, so there weren't any exposures. And that is the guidance that is coming from our local health officials. Even with thorough measures in place to reduce the spread of COVID-19 on school campuses, everyone in the community could be exposed to the virus through everyday interactions with others on campus or off campus. WCPSS is required to report confirmed cases of COVID-19 to Wake County Public Health and work with them for follow-up and contact tracing. If a person with COVID-19 was in a WCPSS facility while infectious, WCPSS will coordinate with local health officials to notify anyone who was in close contact with the infected person while maintaining confidentiality in accordance with FERPA, North Carolina General Statute 130A-143, and all other state and federal laws. Close contact is defined as being within 6 feet of someone confirmed to have COVID-19 for more than 15 minutes within 2 days of the infected person experiencing symptoms or testing positive. With the return of students, the district will also begin publishing a web page on October 26th that shows any confirmed COVID-19 cases by school. The page will be updated at least weekly. All members of the school community will be notified on the day cases are confirmed. Areas of the school will be disinfected when confirmed cases are reported, but schools will not necessarily be closed in keeping with state guidance. School closings would only occur in consultation with state health officials, local health officials, and members of the ABC Scientific Collaborative. Based on the advice of the collaborative and other health officials, no single number can be used to determine closings because the circumstances surrounding any outbreak or cases will play a critical role in determining what the action or final decisions are that need to be taken. Similar to classrooms, large common areas, for example, cafeterias and media centers, are being arranged in order to accommodate for social distancing needs in group settings. You see the X's on the chairs. This allows us one-way directional seating that's socially distanced in a cafeteria. Cafeteria managers, and we've got a little video here for you to watch, have been working with principals to determine the safest way to serve food in their schools given their unique configurations and spaces. So what you see here is an example of how food might be delivered to a classroom. I'll let you watch for a moment. If determined by the principal and school's cafeteria manager that the cafeteria space is not one of the options deemed to be most conducive within the health and safety guidelines, social distancing and cohorting students may be served food in their classrooms. And that's what you saw in the video. We will continue to provide curbside food service for the virtual academy students and for students in remote weeks of their rotation. There are several dates that we may not be able to provide curbside distribution. Those are highlighted on the slide. For these specific occasions, on the previous day prior to a work day or a holiday, our CNS team will provide 2 lunches and 2 breakfasts. And just so you know, we are also working on something over the longer winter break so that we can try to support food security efforts during that time. We are certainly appreciative, as I sent to all of the board members, of the waivers around how we really in continuing to implement the summer feeding program through the remainder of the school year, which allows us to not have to charge students and not have to verify free or reduced lunch status in order to serve them. And the reimbursement for that, we can request reimbursement for all of those meals that are served, whether it is daily in-person instruction or as part of remote instruction or virtual academy, any of the manners in which we distribute food, we will be able to request reimbursement. That really is a great support. Will not fully cover our costs, but is certainly helpful as we go through the rest of the school year. Reducing the risk of exposure to the virus that causes COVID-19 also happens by cleaning and disinfecting. This is an important part of reopening school system buildings and requires careful planning and teamwork. The cleaning products that have been purchased for our schools and transportation are formulated to kill the virus that causes COVID-19. These products are used in spaces such as our classrooms after school, hallways, restrooms, water fountains, cafeteria tables, and other high-touch areas. As mentioned earlier, teachers are being provided Oxivir wipes for high-touch areas in the classrooms during the school day. We want to make sure they have something if they have a need during the classroom day. And in addition to that, wipes are specifically being appropriated for cleaning technology devices, and those have been delivered to schools as well. We've had a lot of questions about HVAC systems. All systems are designed in accordance with North Carolina Mechanical Code and ASHRAE recommendations. All have 4 to 6 air changes per hour. Systems are controlled automatically. Filters are monitored and changed when dirty. We have evaluated and decided to order MERV 13 higher efficiency filters out of an abundance of caution. This is not a critical recommendation from health officials. It is the way they say it is an extra layer if you have the resources to support it, but it is not a widespread practice that is called upon to address the virus. When it comes time to replace a filter in all of our schools, we will be replacing them with MERV 13 filters. Staff can find more information about the products and the processes on Wake Connect if they desire. Families can find out more information on wcpss.net on the FAQ page. For reference, if you are asked about if you want to know what we can do about when we have a confirmed case, there are lots of places specifically in the guidance and the return to school and campus guidelines where you can click on that and get more specific details for anybody who may be interested. So on the next slide, we're going to talk a little bit about bus drivers and how they disinfect touch points. And I think we've used a version of this video previously. Bus drivers will disinfect touch points between routes and at the end of the day. So between student groups and at the end of the day. As you saw in the video, bus drivers going through some of the cleaning and disinfecting protocols that help keep our students and staff safe on buses, which includes spraying and then waiting a period of time. FAST. So the FAST program for employees is going to become FAST 2.0 to accommodate the return of hundreds of CNS and transportation staff to their previous roles. This picture shows a FAST employee that's supporting a student working through a problem at the school. We're very fortunate to have stood that program up as quickly as we did, both the community partnership with the Y on FAST, but also what we did in our schools for the children of our staff, and the ability to pivot with other staff that weren't engaged in activities in order to support the needs of staff that were in our buildings. The key changes for FAST 2.0 include children of employees in grades K through 3 will attend school every day beginning October 26th. Children in grades 4 and 5 will have the option to attend FAST programs daily until November 16th when their classmates return to in-person instruction. Children in grades 6 through 8 will have the option to attend FAST programs during the weeks that they are not in class. Children of WCPSS employees attending the virtual academy will be offered placement in regional FAST programs. Community FAST programs will continue to operate, but their enrollments are expected to fluctuate and decrease, with some of the providers transitioning to before and after school programs instead. Given countless variables involving space, staffing, schedules, and demand, schools have been given the discretion to offer before and after school programs as they see fit. The YMCA of the Triangle has offered to administer any on-campus programs that we might need, even if they traditionally in the past have not. So the schools have that support if they choose to activate it. From March through September, Technology Services distributed 76,680 Chromebooks and 15,082 hotspots. And we have an additional 2,500 hotspots coming this week. An additional 2,500 coming this week. Upon returning to in-person learning, Our schools will have limited technology on hand and available to students on campus, as most devices have been checked out to students for remote learning. Technology guidance has been provided to schools, teachers, and families that addresses how to manage technology for in-person and remote learning. If a student is on a remote schedule, they will continue to use their personal or their WCPSS-provided device. When a student returns to in-person learning, students with WCPSS devices are being asked to bring their device to and from school. Students using personal devices can choose to bring their mobile device to school or not. If the student does not bring a device, schools may choose to assign available devices to students if they need one while they're in the building. Students cannot share a device with another student due to health guidance. Teachers will need to develop lessons that allow students to be successful without a requirement of technology access while at school. An awareness campaign that began about 10 days ago has helped bring attention to the changes that students and families can expect beginning next week. Each one of these campaigns has two parts: external, what families need to know, and internal, what employees need to know. Campaigns are featured on WCPSS.net, all school websites, our school district's intranet, our social media channels, and through emails to families. The topics include top 7 things you need to know about face coverings, what you need to know about changes to cleaning protocols, what happens if there's a case of COVID on campus, what you need to know about changes to meal services, how to prepare your child to return to campus. That's focused on social emotional needs of children. What you need to know about changes to bus procedures, what you need to know about health screenings or instructional changes. Each campaign consists of an article, a video component, and a way for staff and families to ask questions about the topic. Each campaign also includes a new media opportunity for us to share. The following metrics are from the first week of the campaign. On Facebook, the campaign has gained over 1.3 million expressions. On Twitter, over 700,000 impressions. On YouTube, the school district campaign videos have been watched 55,000 times. The most popular content has been the FAQ updates. After each campaign, we've solicited questions from families and employees, answered their questions with an updated post. These posts are averaging 50,000 impressions each. The campaign's public-facing web pages have been visited over 500,000 times. The campaign on the employee intranet pages on Wake Connect has been visited over 12,000 times. Schools are also communicating directly with students and families in their school communities. From social media to school websites and email, schools have been sharing important and exciting information with students and families. Like us, our schools are working hard to instill confidence and a sense of joy in our students and for staff as they return to in-person instruction, communicating new processes, procedures, expectations, and insights into all that has been done to prepare for their safe return. In summary, this slide captures the message that our schools and district is committed to conveying to our students, families, and staff during this unprecedented and challenging time. As we continue to travel this journey, the safety of our students and staff is a priority, and our planning, decisions, and actions, all supportive of and committed to having students and staff return to in-person instruction, are grounded in safety. Borrowing this display from one of our schools, it illustrates and reinforces what we are mindful of each day. You matter. You, our students, matter. You, our staff, matter. We are in this together, and we will continue to rise above this challenge, working collectively and in partnership for our community, each school, every child, every day. The next section of the presentation, I told you that was a long piece, right? The next two are a little bit shorter. Next section of the presentation is really looking ahead to second semester. As you can tell from the preceding slides, the school leaders, teachers have put a tremendous amount of work into bringing students back into the classrooms. And despite all of that work, we know that there's going to be surprises. That's inevitable. And I've said this before. This is my first pandemic. This is our first pandemic, lightly. No playbook here, but we're committed to figuring it out. At the same time, we know that we need to provide staff and parents a better idea of what to expect for second semester. We must continue to look ahead as well. So this next portion of the presentation will focus on what you've heard me call earlier today, the planning assumptions for second semester. I'd like to begin by establishing that our suggested timeline for final approval of a second semester plan. We're beginning today by sharing our planning assumptions for each grade span for second semester. Based on our discussion, questions, feedback that we'll get later today, our plan is to bring to the board a proposal for second semester on November 10th, which is the next board meeting, and then adoption by the board at the board meeting after that, which I believe is November 17th, might be the 24th, one or the other. So whichever the board meeting is that follows the 10th. Regardless of the plan that is ultimately approved, there is a point that must be understood by families, staff, and our general community. We are in the midst of a pandemic that by most accounts will continue to impact our operations for months to come. Any plan that is proposed and adopted must reflect that reality. We appreciate that there is a difference between a plan that is flexible and a plan that is ambiguous. And sometimes that depends on someone's perspective. So let me be clear. We offer these planning assumptions from the perspective of a school system that desperately wants to return to in-person instruction, but is determined to maintain the health and safety of tens of thousands of students and staff. That is why we have prepared schools as seen in the preceding slides. It would be irresponsible to offer a hard and fast plan in October, scheduled for launch in January, that might have no possibility of change. Nevertheless, it is important that we plan and tell you what we're planning for. As a school system, we traveled this path in June as we worked to create a plan that would allow us to return to in-person instruction in August. By July, the community spread of COVID-19 forced us to replace that initial plan with our current Plan B transition. The responsible approach to planning under current conditions is to make our assumptions clear so people know where we stand and what we expect to be able to do, and let those planning assumptions guide us until we may be forced to change course. We hope that we are not, but we must maintain that flexibility. And it is imperative that the public and our staff understand that the flexibility and the ability to pivot must remain in any plan that we put forward. We have a plan. It's not the kind of plan we're used to, where schedules and calendars are approved months and even years in advance. But in working with colleagues throughout North Carolina and nationally, I know that those who cannot accept a plan with this level of flexibility and the ability to pivot woven in won't be very suited to succeeding during a pandemic. And we intend to succeed. We intend to succeed academically, and more importantly, we intend to successfully maintain the safety and well-being of our staff and students. Regardless of the community spread outside our buildings, we have the ability to slow and even stop the spread inside our building using 3 simple steps. And this has been communicated consistently by our partnership with the ABC Scientific Collaborative. Wear your mask, always, period. Keep as much distance as practical, up to 6 feet during the day. Practice good hand hygiene. That means taking the time to wash your hands. With that in mind, you will see 3 factors listed on this slide that could still affect our assumptions for second semester. More specifically, our planning assumptions could be affected by new or additional executive orders from the governor, a dramatic change in local health conditions, which we will interpret using the assistance of state health officials, local health officials, and the ABC Scientific Collaborative, and a clear inability of families and staff to implement announced changes for the remainder of current semester. We have to progress monitor our return to in-person instruction and see how our safety protocols and our other expectations are working in order to ensure that we are ready for what our planning assumptions call for second semester. With the context of the conditions just described, we are using the following planning assumptions for pre-K 3 and special education regional programs beginning second semester. You will see also a list of items that must be considered when making this planning assumption. We are assuming that they will remain in daily in-person instruction for second semester. That's pre-K 3 and K-12 regional programs. Next, you will see the second semester planning assumptions for grades 4 and 5. The current plan for grades 4 and 5 for the remainder of first semester is when they return on November 16th to be in 3-week rotations, 2 cycles through the end of first semester. The following assumptions for grades 4 and 5 beginning second semester are that we would be daily in person in grades 4 and 5. And some of the things that we have to look at as we determine that are what happens with virtual academy registrations. We have to look at what happens with our year-round schools and the ability of our year-round schools to either remain on a single track or not. And all of that will be impacted by virtual academy registrations. We want to monitor, as we said earlier, student, family, and WCPSS staff experiences in our current return to in-person. We'll need to address any staffing needs that may pop up. And we're going to review the compliance of what's happening in our school communities around the protocols that have been put in place. The ABC Scientific Collaborative will continue to be a partner in this work, and certainly if we have a revised executive order, that will impact what we do as well. But our planning assumption for 4th and 5th right now would be to begin second semester with daily in-person. For grades 6 and 8, we are currently, beginning in November 9th for the remainder of first semester, we will be in 3-week rotations. When we begin second semester, our planning assumption at this time is to continue the 3-week rotations. And we must be clear that the 3-week rotation is the only option. The Plan B is the only option that we have, either Plan B or Plan C for grades 6 through 12. Plan A is not an option at this time for grades 6 through 12. So our planning assumptions for second semester at this time remain the 3-week rotation. And the things that we would be considering here, we would continue to monitor our virtual academy registration you'll hear more about in a little while. We will continue to monitor the experience of staff and students in schools. We'll need to look at staffing needs, compliance of the school community with regards to the health and safety protocols that are in place. ABC Science Collaborative, you'll see these repeat across different arenas. And I do think that we will obviously also need to be ready to be flexible, pivot, and have a discussion should we have an executive order that does provide the option of Plan A, which would be and that Plan A has a subset that goes with it, which is also based on what happens with virtual academy registrations, in particular for our multi-track year-round schools. When we go to Plan A, can our multi-track year-round schools, based on who's in in-person instruction, return on a single track or not? So that there's some moving parts to this as we move forward and see what happens. For grades 9-12, as you know, we are now, until the remainder of first semester, remain in remote learning for our students. And the planning assumptions that we are looking at for second semester grades 9-12 is to begin the second semester in a 3-week rotation for our high schools. Again, that is the only option, Plan B or C, that is available to us right now. There is not a Plan A that is available as an option for school systems to choose at this time. So we are planning with the 3-week rotation in mind. And again, you see the same lists of considerations that we will need to take a look at. And again, this is another area where if there is an executive order that does allow the option of Plan A, that we will need to take a look at that. I will say that for our high schools, we do continue to hear from our partners at the ABC Scientific Collaborative that it will be better when we start to try to start in rotations or blended or hybrid model first and then move to fully in person. So we will take a look at that and continue to monitor what's happening statewide with other districts that are in different levels of implementation. This is really just a summary of everything I just said. It tells you what we're doing first semester, and then it tells you what the second semester assumption is. And then I want to list again the drivers that would impact any change to these planning assumptions as we move forward. Any new or additional orders from the governor will have to be taken into consideration. We wanted to continue to collaborate and learn, collaborate with state and local health officials on what's happening in the community, continue to partner and collaborate with the ABC Scientific Collaborative. And as I said before, we must monitor the implementation of our in-person return at those grade levels of schools where that is happening to see what it helps us understand about what we need to do second semester. And then I'll move to the last part of our presentation today, and I'm going to turn it over to Drew Cook, who I think is joining us virtually. He's an Assistant Superintendent of Academics, and he will provide an update on virtual academy and second semester.
Thank you, and Moore. Good afternoon, Chair Sutton and members of the board. As we are making preparation second semester, to dedicate just a few minutes of this afternoon's presentation, provide you with a brief update on our plans for the Wake County Public School System Virtual Academy, which of course will continue to be an important component of our instructional programming for the remainder of the 2021 school year. As you know, the Virtual Academy is designed for those families and students who desire some continuity and stability in their child's learning environment, at least to the degree possible given the circumstances. For those who may have a health or medical need, and also for those students that may thrive in a virtual learning environment and may want to continue for the remainder of the school year. While this afternoon's presentation will focus primarily on the spring semester registration and enrollment process and those related structures, I will note for your reference that we will bring a more comprehensive update and overview of the Virtual Academy program to next Monday's Student Achievement Committee meeting, where we'll share and discuss some of our early experiences and observations as we also look ahead to implications for the second half of the school year. So more to come on this subject next week as well. Before we talk about the spring, we'll start by sharing just a couple of notes and reminders about the current fall semester in the Virtual Academy. For the remainder of the fall semester, students may transfer in or out of the Virtual Academy only when there are extenuating circumstances. We've talked about this a little bit before. Examples of extenuating circumstances might include health and safety concerns, perhaps an immunocompromised family member, caretaker, or someone else who may live in a student's home, and possibly even other unforeseen significant changes or family circumstances that have occurred since the beginning of the school year. In general, as you know, such transfers like this are rare, but allowable in those extenuating circumstances. Limiting these transfers for the remainder of the first semester is necessary to maintain the structure and the functionality of existing school schedules, which of course are built on the identified needs of students and families prior to the beginning of the school year. The reality is large-scale changes made outside of the registration window would potentially force schools to redraw class rosters, change student schedules, and even teaching assignments for teachers in some instances, any or all of which could significantly impact all students, even the large majority of whom who may wish to remain in the environment they signed up for. So as these requests occur, schools will consider these and other factors when making decisions regarding transfers outside of the semester change. We would remind our families for guidance and support in making such decisions, or even in just determining available options. Families should consult with their building principal for more information. Now, as we turn our attention to the spring semester, we plan to offer 2 spring registration windows for the virtual academy, one for elementary schools and one for secondary. For secondary schools, which of course is inclusive of middle and high schools, the registration window is scheduled to open tomorrow on October the 21st and will run through November the 4th. You may note that this is actually a change from what was initially planned and communicated, which originally had an end date of October the 24th. Based on the feedback we've received, we have made an adjustment to extend the window by another week in order to provide our families with a little bit more time to make a decision. And as Ms. Moore mentioned a little earlier, for those families that do have elementary siblings, they'll have at least a brief opportunity to experience a return to school in rotations under Plan B, which may be helpful for some in making a decision about the spring semester. For elementary schools, the window is currently scheduled for December the 2nd through December the 9th. I'll mention just a couple of things. After considering the multiple factors that are involved, we did decide on the 2 separate registration windows for several reasons. First and foremost, by the nature of their very instructional design, with dozens and in some cases more than 100 unique course offerings, middle and high schools face significant and highly complex challenges in scheduling classes for students, more so certainly than in pre-pandemic times. It is critical that middle and high school principals know as soon as possible who is attending their schools, whether they are attending in person or registered in the Wake County Public School System Virtual Academy, and also what courses those students will need and have enrolled in as early as possible to ensure a successful scheduling effort. Every day really does matter in this process, and we've got to provide as much runway as possible for effective and efficient planning, which of course will reap some great benefits for our middle and high school students beginning in January. In terms of the elementary registration window, we can afford to schedule a little later than middle and high schools. It is important also to support our elementary schools in whatever way we can, both staff and families, as they're preparing to open their doors to students on October the 26th for the first time since March. Among other factors, we did not feel it was necessary nor prudent to have schools and families have the added distraction of having to make a virtual academy decision for the spring semester, while at the same time being focused on preparing for the very first week of in-person instruction for their students. In addition, and as we referenced a moment ago, as part of the rationale for extending the secondary registration window a bit, the December window for elementary schools will offer parents a greater insight into how K-5 in-person learning is progressing, thereby allowing them to make a little bit more of an informed decision about their children's spring semester learning options if they're kind of weighing out what their options are. Given the later in-person start date for middle schools with the rotations in November, and with high schools remaining fully remote, of course, through the first semester, it's just not feasible for us to be able to provide this same kind of opportunity to our secondary families in terms of having some experience with the in-person rotations first semester prior to or in coordination with making a decision about the spring semester and the virtual academy. So just a couple of quick notes on who needs to complete the virtual academy registration for the spring. First, to be clear, for students who are currently registered in the virtual academy for the full year and who wish to continue for the spring semester, no action is required to remain registered. The registration form should be completed for each K-12 student, though, that meets the following criteria. First, the student is not currently registered in the Wake County Public School System Virtual Academy for the spring semester, but wants to register for the spring. This could be either Virtual Academy students who are registered for just the fall, or students in the district-approved return to in-person plan for the first semester who wish to now enroll in Virtual Academy for second semester. Or it could be for the student who's currently registered in the Virtual Academy for the spring semester who wish to cancel their registration and return to the district-approved plan for in-person instruction in the spring. Regarding communications efforts, we have begun communicating with our principals, school-based Virtual Academy contacts, and as of yesterday with parents and the community regarding the spring registration windows. We've also updated the Wake County Public School System Virtual Academy website to include all new and applicable updated information. Meanwhile, families will, of course, continue to receive notifications through school messenger updates from the district and also from their schools, as well as through available social media platforms. And as was mentioned a few minutes ago, at the upcoming October 26th Student Achievement Committee meeting next week, we will be sharing more information about the Virtual Academy in terms of experiences and lessons learned during the fall semester, which may support families, again, who are trying to make a decision, weighing out all options about the spring semester. We would just remind everyone, as families consider their options for the spring semester, it's again worth reiterating that the Virtual Academy may provide a more consistent instructional option for families, again, relatively speaking, given all the various known and unknown challenges we're facing. If families are seeking some level of consistency, though, the Virtual Academy may be a good choice for them. Conversely, students not enrolled in the Virtual Academy will participate in a return to in-person plan that is driven by health and safety guidance, evolving community conditions, and even state-level directives among those factors that Ms. Moore mentioned just a few minutes ago. And as we shared back in July, and the same guidance is still applicable now, this could mean the return to in-person occurs in rotations as part of Plan B. It could be fully in-person under a Plan A, or perhaps even as part of some other state-level plan or structure that doesn't even exist yet. So all of those factors should be considered by families when deciding what best suits the needs of their children. So as we close out this last segment of the presentation, we did want to share just a little bit briefly about virtual programming for our pre-K students. There is now a virtual option for pre-K families who have health or medical concerns for quarter two. A survey has been administered and families have been provided with this option. For the upcoming spring semester, families will be able to register online for this virtual option for pre-K students. The pre-K registration window for this option will align with the December 2nd through 9th elementary registration window, and the link will be available on the Wake County Public School System website. So that concludes this section of the presentation, and with that, I'll turn it back over to Superintendent Moore to close and to transition us to the Q&A discussion.
So that's a lot of content. So I hope that as you've been processing and thinking and taking notes, Mr. Haggerty has like 6 pages over here, that I want to open it up for questions, comments, clarifications. There are a number of members of staff, and I'll turn it over to Mr. Sutton to sort of guide that.
Well, thank you for that very detailed and informative plan, both on the reopening for this year and plans for next year. Is greatly appreciated, and information that I'm sure all of us were looking forward to receiving, both here around the table and in the community. I'll start with Mr. Haggerty, since he has a few notes, and I'll go around. I saw some of the hands, so we'll start with you, Mr. Haggerty.
I appreciate that. Thank you, Mr. Sutton. First of all, I want to thank Mr. Cook. I know that we've had a lot of communication about Virtual Academy since the beginning of this program, and I want to acknowledge that even with the difficulties and the challenges that you say are there with scheduling for the secondary schools, many parents have come to us with strong requests, recommendations that we extend the time for Virtual Academy. And so I appreciate that you have extended that and that you were able to extend that to November the 4th. Again, that's noted. I know it adds to your planning time, but I really appreciate that. I also want to give my appreciation for the information about the virtual pre-K, Virtual Academy for pre-K. As you know, this is something that a number of parents and a number of pre-K staff have been talking to us about, and I know that there were a number of challenges with this. And I want to just acknowledge, all the work that you and the committee have done to make those a reality. So thank you. I had a couple questions, just either, I don't know if the superintendent, Mr. Cook, or others could answer for me based on all of the information that we've been given this afternoon. Generally, I'm curious, we didn't really talk about this, what the face-to-face instruction will look like daily in terms of technology, because we talked about what will happen for the students that go back face-to-face if they have a district-provided device. They would be expected to bring it in. If they don't have a district-expected device, they'd be asked to bring one from home, or the school might be able to provide one. And my question is, so are you anticipating that face-to-face instruction would require the devices a lot more? Would it be something similar to what they're doing in remote learning in the classroom if families don't currently have a device that their students would be willing to bring in, that maybe they've used at home but would have to come in? Is this something they should consider either purchasing, requesting, or that they would need to get from the school?
So I'm happy to get that started, and Marlo or Edward can chime in as needed, but we want to set a runway that doesn't provide an expectation that a child needs a device while in face-to-face learning. We know that our teachers have been moving along the continuum of integrating technology into instruction, and that may need to pause a bit based on the availability of devices in the classroom. So it is why we have directed that no activities require, and the learning not require, that you have a device in the classroom setting. And it's really always been that way. But anybody else want to add anything?
I think you said that very nicely, Ms. Moore. We didn't have one-to-one prior to this. What we're asking right now is that we think about, certainly technology can be used when it's available and in ways that allow for multiple modalities to be used. But I would also say that now's a great time for us to be focused on the relationships with our students and be doing work related to that, since we've had so much screen time over the past several months. So I
appreciate that. Thank you, Ms. Gaddis. Second question, when speaking about the FAST program, one of the things that was discussed was some of our community providers pivoting and maybe doing more to provide before care and after care. So I have heard from families who are interested in, if there's a return to face-to-face instruction, what before or after care resources would be available. Where should they look for that information? Is that a school-by-school decision? Will be there a district hub for that sort of information? Where can we send them?
It will be a school-by-school decision whether or not the school will implement a before or after care program on their site. And they have access to our community partners who are willing to support a program on their site if they don't want to run it themselves, because a lot of our schools run their own, which they can continue to do if they're following all of the protocols. And then if the school level contact doesn't yield a possibility or an option, then the family might want to turn to the community providers that might still be providing at their locations, like the Ys, where they may still have it before and after school. But start with the school and then move to community.
Thank you. And like I said, there were a lot of notes. I do want to ask a little bit about some of the factors that you said go into next year's assumptions. When you talked about, are there additional statewide mandates that come down? Is there a new executive order? You talked about what we could learn from monitoring what we've seen, just in terms of compliance with the plans that are in place, and then continuing advice from the ABC Science Collaborative. So, I know that these are the assumptions going forward, but do you see a scenario where if, community health numbers pivoted the wrong way, or if something wasn't working, that we would come in and we would examine these and perhaps, implement new protocols or restrictions if they were advised by the local health data and by your own monitoring and compliance?
So I do think that shifting the assumptions, whether to in those grade levels that aren't allowed a Plan A to a Plan A type scenario once it is allowed, or in another direction that would be more restrictive and return more to a remote learning scenario for larger groups of students or all students. That will have to be done in collaboration with local and state health officials and through orders and other things. It will not be something that we would do on our own. And we just don't know what's before us or how soon some of the executive orders might change that would provide a different option than the ones that we are planning for. But whichever direction that goes, we'll need to be able to pivot, discuss, review the pertinent factors of how our teachers doing, how our students doing, what are our classroom capacities looking like based on what the executive orders say. All of those things will have to be taken into consideration for something that would shift the planning assumptions.
Thank you. And so at the beginning of your presentation, I heard you discuss a lot of specifics in terms of compliance plans, in terms of monitoring, new systems being put into place. These are all systems that you have confidence in. I know that you talked about you want as many, for example, run-throughs to happen by this Wednesday as possible, acknowledging that in some cases they might take a Thursday or Friday.
Right.
But you feel pretty good about the ability to implement all of these things before reopening, and that these will continue to be monitored, you said, by senior leadership staff?
So I have confidence that our schools will practice the protocols that are required, and I have confidence that we might need to make revisions as we go along, because how we implement a protocol in the first week, or what it looks like in a rotation versus what it might look like when all students return in some of our grade levels, all of those things might shift how we need to engage, and it may require that we revisit what we've put in place that we can do next week and be able to pivot if it's not working, or if it works really well and you don't need nearly as many people as you thought you were going to need. I mean, there's lots of ways that that'll happen. I'm confident that they'll practice. I'm confident that they will make it work for their schools by seeing what the implementation looks like and making changes if needed. I'm also confident that as both teachers have an opportunity to reflect on and provide feedback on the implementation of protocols that we will provide, and how staff, SLT, when we are visiting schools, can check also, and then how principals are responding to that staff feedback, that we're creating avenues to see whether or not the protocols that are being put in place are being successful and being adhered to, so that we can demonstrate that we care about the importance of these protocols, so that we can focus on the in-person instruction.
And so you could see changes if you had feedback in terms of improving a protocol, or, I know something that's been talked about has been, if we can bring volunteers into buildings, for
Right.
example, and volunteers are essential, that maybe, some schools or central office staff you specifically mentioned could come in and take some of these functions
Correct.
over. And so that would be something you would explore as well?
Yes, and we're already doing it with asking how we can bring central services staff into school, what are the kinds of things that they would like to do, and what are the school needs that they have. We're going to continue to use our CNS and transportation employees to support our needs in FAST 2.0 or other things in schools. If we're not fully operational in those areas, be mostly CNS, I think, versus transportation. But we have to be ready to take the feedback that we get based on what is or isn't working. And it's why when we talk about an opportunity for teachers who may want to, or staff who may want to report something but have it be anonymous, we want it to be both concerns and affirmations, because we know that some things will work well and people will want to praise that, and that whether it's anonymous or not. And we know that some things may not work well, and they'll need to provide that feedback so that we can course correct. Yep.
And so finally, it seemed like we had a good reopening run-through at Combs Elementary. I know Ms. Cash said that's her favorite elementary school, right? One of them. But I read good reports about that. As some of these other drills and run-throughs happen, is that something that we as board members could attend or others could attend, just for transparency and just for the ability to be there, to participate, to volunteer, or otherwise see what's going on?
I think that's a great idea. Let me just think about maybe having the area soups, if they know when some are occurring over the course of this week, just maybe letting you guys know.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you, Ms. Moore. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Hagerty. Ms. Mahaffey, I saw you next, and as Mr. Hagerty, I'm hopefully will limit board members to about 10 minutes in your questions so that we can get through everybody.
I don't have as many pages of notes as Mr. Haggerty did.
It's all right.
Superintendent Moore, thank you so much, and thank you to our staff who have helped put this together. My first question is on slide 7, which is about the asynchronous days and the updates to the calendar, looking at the approved remote learning days. If I could hear a little more, does this just formalize in the district when these asynchronous learning days are done? Right now, they're kind of done school by school. I know my school, it's Friday. I know at Ms. Scott's children's school, it's Wednesday. So does this more formalize when that is happening? Is that just for students in virtual academy and remote, or does this also include if your child's in the building, do they stay home that day? I'm just trying to make sure we understand
Right.
what that means.
So again, I'll ask anybody who's listening to correct me or add to what I'm getting ready to say, but so these dates are now district identified for all schools, all students, whether it is their in-person week, their remote week, or virtual academy. We had provided schools discretion through the week of October 26th if they were implementing an asynchronous day. But after that, we felt it was important to have them done at the district level so that there'd be a little bit more consistency, if parents have kids in multiple schools and that sort of thing.
Okay. So that does include, so if a Plan B middle schooler or 4th and 5th grader are in if their cohort is in on December 2nd, they stay home that day instead of being in the building?
So Drew, I'm going to ask you to confirm and extend.
Yes, ma'am. And the answer is yes, Ms. Mahaffey, I think, to your specific question. And I think the rationale is obviously we have documented and discussed previously a number of our teachers that are going to be teaching both students in person and students that are also working remotely and students that are full-time in the virtual academy in some cases. And so in gathering all the feedback and in trying to provide additional time and planning opportunities for our teachers and PLTs, we felt like it was important that we ensure that this opportunity is made available, quite frankly, to those teachers that probably are going to need it the most, and that is those teachers that are teaching in all of those environments potentially. And I think it also creates an opportunity based on a lot of the early feedback that we were hearing, that you as board members were hearing about screen time and the amount of time that kids were engaged in front of a computer screen. And so at least through the first semester, we felt like it was important for the sake of continuity and consistency and to be responsive to the preponderance of feedback that this would be implemented not just for the virtual environment, but also for the blended and in-person environment as well, again, at least through the first semester.
Okay, and following up, just for clarity's sake, that includes our students who are in Plan A in kindergarten through third grade, as well as our regional program students?
That is correct, ma'am.
Okay. Thank you. We had talked about what the water fountains look like. I think I've lost slide numbers at this point. But there are some lovely water fountains from Wake Lawn Elementary on this slide. And students are asked to use a water bottle. I know previously we had been told that disposable cups would be made available for students. Have we thought about reaching out to our business partners to provide water bottles? I'm sure there are plenty of 5Ks that did not get run this year that are just sitting in storage somewhere. I know my children will take a water bottle to school and it will never return. I know that goes across the K-12 spectrum. But I know we have a lot of community partners, business partners that want to be able to assist. Is that something that we can reach out to different chambers of commerce or Wake Ed partnership so that we're not, A, wasting disposable cups, but B, so students have a water bottle that is theirs?
I did actually provide that very feedback to about every quarter. Wake Education Partnership brings together members from different chambers to have sort of an education afternoon, and I am part of the agenda. And I spoke with them just in the last week or so about exactly that type of support for schools. I think right now schools are doing it on their own. They're reaching out, or they have parents and that sort of thing. But I think looking at maybe doing a survey, not a literal survey, but a survey as in a scan through our area soups to see whether or not schools need support with something like that, and then figuring out how to do that, help them in doing that, because not all of our schools may have the ability of partners ready and willing and offering.
Right.
So we can do a scan to see where there's a need and then see what we can connect. But
And then I know there have been a lot of concerns about lunchtime. I was glad to see the different service videos coming out. Just, concerns in that eating time because you can't eat with your mask on. If there can be further guidance for families on what that's going to look like or the expectation during that time provided.
okay.
And then I was glad to hear about the HVAC. I know it'll be a comfort to many of our teachers and families that we've gotten the MERV 13 filters. I've learned a lot about the ASHRAE guidance over the course of this. Question is, the trailers that are on many of our campuses, are they able to have that same cycling? How do they work? Is it centralized? Is it at the trailer themselves? Will they be the priority for getting the filter because they're a little bit set up a little bit differently? I mean, I know when we talk about buildings, trailers are a different animal sometimes.
Yeah, I'd need to check to see if Don is on to see if he has any specific that he can provide about the status of our mobile units and their systems. I'm not sure if he's on.
I am here. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Yes, the mobile units and modular units will get the new filters. I can't tell you the sequence of installation yet. I would think we'll probably do a whole school at a time and go by school rather than doing part of the school and then coming back later. We'll let you know more as we figure out the exact schedule.
Thank you, Mr. Hayden. Are the mobile units able to be, as you're changing, how many times they circulate, is that changed at the central office level like the buildings are, or is it unit by unit on the site? I'm seeing Mr. Fletcher's head nod and shake as I go, so I think I have my answer, but since you can't see that, I'll let you answer.
I can see him, and I would not disagree.
All right, thank you, Mr. Hayden. Thank you. Those are my questions, Chair Sutton.
Thank you, Ms. Mahaffey. Mrs. Scott, I think I saw your hand next.
You did, thank you. And you're able to hear me with this? Okay, thank you. I appreciate all of the information, and I kind of want to piggyback off Ms. Mahaffey's question about lunches. What will lunchtime look like? I think we need a concrete answer now because classes start on Monday. Will students be allowed to talk? Will the time be shortened? What exactly will that look like? Because that has been a question that I know board members have received repeatedly.
Right. And so we have asked our principals to work directly with their cafeteria managers, and I know that Paula DeLuca and her staff have reached out to every school to provide assistance and guidance. That it's a school level plan. That depends on whether they're going to be using the cafeteria or in classroom or a combination thereof. So I can't give you a specific answer about what that plan looks like in each school. And I don't know if Dawn is on or if Paula is on that can provide any overview of the guidance that's been provided to schools or the support around answering some of those questions.
Hi, thank you for that question. I'll be happy to answer. Our nutrition had put together a comprehensive guide that included guidance for principals, for all of the CNF staff, as well as for parents. And a separate parent guide was posted and is available to provide information about the various service options we have. What we elected to do was to give flexibility at the local level because we recognized early on that there was a need to actually account for the variations and the number of students that might be present in a school on any given day based on the various plans that could potentially need to be implemented. And also the variances that have occurred within just the infrastructure and development of the schools as a building and how students move through the buildings. So all of those plans were underway and developed back in June, and all of our managers are working through making sure that they're prepared for Monday service. All of our curbside operations at this point will continue to run from 10:45 until 12:45 every day. And then, of course, schools have worked through their schedules to try to accommodate in-school services in alignment with curbside services to the greatest extent they can, given the staff that's needed really to support both operations.
Thank you, and I certainly appreciate all of the efforts that have been made to provide lunches for our students and the breakfast. That's been great, and of course thankful that we have the extension through the school year to provide lunch and breakfast at no cost to our families. But I still, I'd love to hear an example of what that would look like for a teacher who may be having lunch in their classroom. What will that look like? Will there? Can you provide an example from at least one school so that I can better understand this when I receive emails from concerned folks?
Sure. And so the various service options are this. Obviously, one that you've touched on is where a student would potentially be eating in their classroom. Meals may be delivered to the classroom, or students may go to the cafe to pick up their meal and then return to their classroom to eat. And what they will all receive a meal that is prepackaged because the requirements entail no touching of foods and no student selection of any items. So everything will be placed into a bag for convenient delivery. It will be controlled in that manner so that when a student receives it, they'll open their bag and they'll open their items up, and then they'll be able to eat and put everything back into their bag and place that into a trash can where it will be picked up by custodial staff. In terms of the actual menu items, we will continue to provide hot meals, and so students will receive that hot entree, and then of course they'll have fruits, vegetables, grains, and of course milk. So it will be a complete meal. And then all students, whether they're eating in school or whether they're picking up via curbside, will receive their meal at no cost.
I think, Ms. Scott, part of what you're asking is, what does this actually look like for the student and the teacher in the classroom?
Right.
And
specifically, if I'm a third grade teacher and I've got.
So I'll give you, this
Yeah.
was actually part of, some of this came out as part of the Q&A in one of the webinars with the ABC Scientific Collaborative, and the kinds of suggestions that have been given to teachers around, number one, you want to ensure that, like you do in the classroom for instruction, that the students are all facing one direction, that they're not facing each other. That when they remove their masks, it is only to eat while they are seated. That if you are concerned about the number of students all removing masks at one time, which is ABC seemed to say that if that was a concern, you could have a group remove it and then another group and then another group. But literally, if you do have the social distancing in the classroom, that removing to sit and eat, it's one of these things that it's different than what we've asked kids to do before. It's not something that they're used to doing. It is requiring a protocol that's not normal for how we engage in lunch. And that you may want to shorten the amount of time that's actually required in order to minimize the opportunity for there to be less adherence to the protocols that would be required while you eat. But I think what would be helpful as a follow-up would be, as we are bringing kids back in, to get real examples of what this looks like and how they're implementing, because we're starting with the smaller rotations, and hopefully we'll learn from the smaller rotations on what we might be able to do or what those practices might need to look like when they are fully in person.
I appreciate that, because that's a concern when people are going to have their masks off, and I certainly always appreciate extending flexibility for each school community. All of our 191 schools are all very different, but I also don't want that to. I'd feel badly if that also caught teachers in a place where, if there's not, a rule or something to back them up by saying, no, I'm saying you can't talk, we're going to just eat, and then when your mask goes back on, and then you can talk. If there's nothing in place to support them, to provide that level of comfort and safety that they need, that's just something that I would be concerned. That's why I was asking so much about that. I appreciate that. I really appreciate the YMCA reaching out and offering to provide after-school care for the schools that request them. The partnership with them is so valuable. So I did want to say thank you to that. The other question I had was the asynchronous day for special education students, particularly those in regional programs, knowing that some of those students are also medically fragile and their IEPs may have an element that has made it difficult, if not impossible, to serve them at home right now. And just to be clear, that asynchronous day, they will also have an asynchronous day for regional programs?
I'll let Drew answer that, but I believe that is the intent. I think it's for all students unless they've made a modification.
Yes, that's correct, Ms. Scott. All students on those days. And again, I think we recognize, and it's not lost on us, I think it's important in weighing out kind of the consequences of any decision. And sometimes I think that's the catch-22 that we find ourselves in these circumstances, where we try to repair or fix one problem that could potentially create a series of other issues as well. And so that's something that we talked about. I think we recognize that whether it's our regional program students or even, our youngest elementary students that are back home on those days when we have the asynchronous time, there's a trade-off and there's a cost associated, in not providing that in-person time on those days. But we feel like, again, in gathering all the feedback from multiple stakeholders, whether it's from parents, from schools, from teachers, that's the best balance I think that we can come up with, especially as we're all kind of navigating uncharted territory and new waters when it comes to first the in-person 3-week rotations and then also the transition to fully in-person. And so we feel like that's the best effort that we can make at this time to balance out some of those competing interests and needs that all of our students have.
I appreciate that, and I certainly understand how complex that is because not all regional program students utilize special education transportation, which would probably make that easier to work with that. But I certainly understand how complicated that is, and I hope that that's something that can be examined specifically. The value of the asynchronous day for our students in the regional special education programs. And my last question, I know it wasn't on the presentation, but I have to ask if there's an opportunity to talk about it now or during the meeting. But we, everyone received the email about band and chorus. And when can we talk about that? Says the music teacher.
Edward, do you want to provide at least something? We might could follow up next week in student achievement briefly, but if you want to provide an overview now.
Sure, I'll jump in from one music teacher to another. So, as most of you know, I am a K-12 music teacher, and so this was certainly not an easy decision. And has been indicated earlier, we are trying to always err on the side of caution. And with each new entry point into the school year, we are trying to do it in a layered, as Superintendent Moore said earlier, a sort of hybrid process. And so we did talk a couple of weeks ago about a plan for returning to arts, and we are still committed to that plan. The ABC Science Collaborative and Wake Department of Health and Human Services do indicate that, they recommend that we suspend band and choral activities as there is an increased risk of transmission in those settings. And I would also suggest to look at the Stronger Schools North Carolina K-12 toolkit on page 4. It also recommends avoiding activities that have the possibility to generate droplets. But what I'll say that's more important is this is just a first step. And in allowing bands and chorus to come together, we thought it was important. Some teachers haven't seen their kids yet, and folks that are in these organizations have not seen each other yet through the virtual community. And so there is an opportunity for them to come together to play percussion instruments, to work on theory sorts of work, to engage in activities that may be related to music but just aren't playing and singing. I will say that there is, some early studies out there on the masking of brass players. The mask have the slit in the center of the mask, and they also have these covers that they call woodwind bags, or like a flute sock that you can cover the instrument with and play. And we know that there is aerosol transmission. There are droplets that come out of keyholes and bells of woodwind instruments and then out of the bells of brass instruments. And so the early studies do show that there is aerosol emissions can be reduced. And so what's important for us to know is the amount of reduction. Is it significant enough to protect students? And so as we have worked with the ABC Science Collaborative, one of the things that we have discussed is the potential of, once we have all of this PPE here in the district, what might our next steps be? And so we are committed to doing everything we can to move to choral and band once we have a little bit more information on some of those aerosol studies. And also, just to remind you that PPE is not in the district yet. It has been ordered, the covers for the veils, and also there are special choral face masks for folks to wear for singing, and all of that has been ordered for our students yet. So it is not yet in the district, but it is on its way.
Thank you for that, Dr. McFarland. And I'm glad to hear that the special PPE for the instruments has been ordered and that will happen. I know that just reading this just as a regular person, I'm not a doctor, but the way I would interpret what's on page 4 of the toolkit is that they're talking about indoors. And as someone who, also went to college for music, there's absolutely value in music theory and the opportunity to practice that. But I do remain really concerned. We have we have high school students who are going on who are going to be music majors, and they are preparing for their auditions right now. And there is a special camaraderie, as many of you know, that happens within those types of classes. And we do see, I don't want to say this too much, but we do see other places across the country having successful outdoor rehearsals with their bands and with their choruses, even still continuing to use masks and the appropriate instrument safety protections. But that's really hard to see. And of course, that knowing that's hard to see also, I think, shows the example of how hard this is on all of us, and has been and continues to be. And the impact of COVID is just so far-reaching and has been. So I do appreciate that that's work that will be ongoing, because I think we've got to allow these students, our musicians, the opportunity to participate safely in the ensembles outdoors. Having written marching band drill myself, I know it can be done. I know you can space out these students. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, I will just add, in closing to your comments, Ms. Scott, playing and singing is definitely a lot more fun than theory. We all certainly know that. And just to close, we did talk with the ABC Collaborative doctors about specifically being outside and spreading apart, and there was still a no-go because it's just so early. I mean, look at how much information we have now that we didn't have in March, and so everything is evolving and new. But we clearly are committed to an aggressive timeline of returning to arts activities as soon as possible, and we are not going to let this rest.
Thank you, Dr. McFarland. Thank you, Chair Sutton. Those are my questions.
Thank you. Mrs. Cash.
Thank you. I have quite a few questions that have come to me, and I believe there's a possibility that I could wait till, and I would like to have Mr. Cook answer this. There's a lot of questions about the virtual academy and how it'll be affected by the remote days. The virtual academy kids seem to be extremely happy with the programs they're getting. It's a very popular program, and I know they're really a little worried about how the number of kids will be impacting from remote into the virtual academy. So something that's working really well, they are actually really worried about it being changed. So will we be talking about that on our student achievement, about how the virtual academy numbers and the impact of the number of hours that they'll get in virtual academy with remote kids?
I think it is something, I think, Ms. Cash, that we'll be discussing. We're looking at an overview of the Virtual Academy program. I think our intent next Monday is to kind of talk about and take a look at where we've been in terms of lessons we've learned, observations, experiences that we've now gathered over the course of the last couple of months in real time and experiential practice. But also, I think, to your point, taking a look at some of the implications and challenges that we might anticipate moving forward, as you've referenced, in moving to a blended model, for example, where we know we've got some students now and teachers that will be navigating in different learning environments. I think that's certainly a challenge that we are discussing and preparing for. I would say that it's safe to assume that'll be part of our conversation next week. I certainly think that that's one of the challenges that we have to anticipate, in addition to just looking for what the updated numbers are going to look like and what the expectations in the spring might be, depending on whether or not we have an increase, decrease, and some fluctuation in enrollment second semester. All of those things, including have to be factored to our decision-making and planning moving forward. And there's no doubt, there's no question, right, from an instructional standpoint, we've all been working in the same online environment now since August. And as we've talked about, it gets a little bit more complex when we start moving into additional learning environments, although that's the direction we want to go. I think to your point, there's no question that's going to have some implications for the way we build schedules, the way that we program around the virtual academy. So yes, ma'am, that'll be part of the discussion, I believe, next Monday.
Thank you, Mr. Cook. I will save all my questions for then because I think that'll be a good time to discuss it. I have a question about two things that kind of piggyback on each other. I'm assuming the hand sanitizers that are in the schools we refilled by our custodial staff and those in the hallways and things, so that
Yes.
would be if somebody
Yes.
asked me that.
Yes.
So if parents tend to ask us a lot of questions that are probably more school-oriented, the things that we probably won't answer as a whole system, we would say there's principals because they're doing different things in different schools. Would we ask these parents then to probably contact their principal? I don't want to bog down our principals, but
Well, I think generally speaking, the best place to start is at the school level with your questions that a parent may have or
Okay.
a staff member may have. And I think depending on how that response happens, you then look to other places if you need to escalate something beyond the school level. But I think you do have to start at the school level.
okay. Okay, I think that's good for us to be able to do that for them. Now, when you talked a little bit about bringing devices to school when you come in person, we're not talking about our K-3 kids bringing like the kindergartners bringing their computers to school every day when they come in person?
So if they have a WCPSS-issued device, we're asking that they bring it to school so that they're carrying it back and forth for when they're in remote or when they are in person. They may not use it when they bring it to school, but they have it if they're doing something that day that requires the usage of a device. And it's, I think most lower grade levels have not been in the habit of using Chromebooks prior to now very much. Some may not. So I think that'll be consistent communication between the teacher and the students and families is going to have to happen because they'll need it at home when they're in their remote periods. But they may or
Right.
may not need it when they're in the classroom. I think
Right.
we're asking them to bring it back and forth in case it is needed.
I've watched kindergartners carrying those Chromebooks in their book bags, and it's not pleasant.
It is
Getting on
not
a
the
bus.
best thing for longevity.
It's heavy. Okay, I just wondered, okay. And then just a follow-up question on the FAST program. I did have the opportunity to go into a couple of the FAST programs at the Y, and lunch was very interesting. Actually, it's very quiet, which is kind of sad, but it's very quiet. They do take their masks off. They don't talk to each other. They giggle and look at each other, make eyes and stuff like that, but it is kind of quiet in there. So the FAST program that you talked about, that even the Y might offer some things after school, you aren't talking about free care. You're
No.
talking, okay, good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I want to be sure. Okay. And I think that's all that that's good for now.
All right. Thank you, Mrs. Cash. Dr. Martin, then Mrs. Kushner.
Thank you. Thank you for the update. It's a variety of questions. Mr. Haggerty noted initially, and again, I appreciate the moving back at least a little bit, the deadline for the virtual academy sign up for the secondary schools. But I guess I'm a little, and I understand we want the information as soon as possible. I understand the challenges of scheduling and all that kind of thing, very much like the challenge that a teacher has of, I didn't get a week of planning and now, I've got to make things happen. But I'm a bit concerned about having this date be November 4th when whatever the plan is for the spring semester is to be presented to the board on the 10th, and the earliest approval would be the 17th. So it feels to me like even that November 4th is asking the community to sign up for a plan that has not yet been presented or approved. I have a problem with that. I don't know about my fellow board members, but it would feel to me like we need a logic behind the decision rather than just this is a time period. And I believe that if I were signing up for it, I would want to know what the plan was that I was signing up for. So,
Right.
like I say, I understand the difficulty. We need to get it as soon as possible. At the same
Right.
time, I have a hard time asking our community to sign up for a plan that has not been presented to the board or approved.
I would just say that in the absence of any of the factors that we mentioned changing between now and November 10th, our planning assumption is the proposal that will come to the board. And I don't know that I can go any further than that, because unless one of those factors changes it, an executive order, really it's an executive order at this point, because the others aren't even in place long enough to be evaluating what's happening in our buildings and that sort of thing. That's that planning, and it is the option that we have for high schools, because for secondary schools, 6 through 8, we only have two options, Plan B or fully remote Plan C. And what we're saying is we will move to Plan B. So unless there is something in an executive order that would require that we go to Plan C, I don't see there's going to be much shift in the 612 recommendation.
Okay, I mean, I can somewhat
But I
accept
get what
that.
you're saying. I mean, I get what
I
you're
mean,
saying.
I think the optics of that doesn't make a lot of sense. And number two, it feels to me like, again, if I were in the situation, I would want to see what this 3-week rotation actually looks like, how it actually functions. And in fact, one of the questions that I would like to ask us to continue to explore is there a chance in the spring that we might be able to go to a 2-week rotation instead of a 3-week rotation? Because, again, from an educator's perspective, if you're juggling 3 cohorts, the face-to-face and cohort rotated out 1 week away, 2 weeks away, you can't do the same thing with everybody, and so you're juggling 3 cohorts. So the smaller we can get the number of cohorts, I think the better quality of our education. So I guess that too is one of my requests in the planning, that, can we look at it and see if a 2-week rotation, I would say particularly at the high school level, it may not be as necessary at the younger grades, but it really feels to me like at the high school level, if we could go to a 2-week rotation, that'd be something I would love to see work being done to see if it would be possible.
And again, this is, I feel like it's a little chicken and egg here, right? We got to see what the Virtual Academy registration looks like to know how to plan, but people don't know how to make a choice because they're not sure what something's going to look like. We couldn't do a 2-week rotation if a large number of the current Virtual Academy students decided to return to in-person instruction. It would need to remain 3 weeks if the requirements on social distancing and buses for 612 remain as they are now.
And this gets back to one of my continuing frustrations is I feel like we're working in a zero-sum universe. And, we're trying to do new things, different things, and so is transportation defining our educational system? I think we've all had some of that challenge in the past as well, and it feels like maybe that's happening again. So I understand the busing issue, but this shouldn't be a continuing thing. So again, is that right? This is why we should have a fund balance. We don't have a fund balance. Do we need to go and ask for resources to deal with transportation if transportation is the block? I don't know if it is or not.
Yeah. Well, I think I'm not sure that we know how many drivers we have at this point, and we're always looking for more. We have found ourselves, it's not just getting more drivers at our current structures, right? I think that the job itself has to be sufficiently attractive and so forth to garner the applicants to come in. Just because if we had more funds for more drivers, doesn't mean that we get the drivers. It shouldn't drive the decision, but it can't be ignored given the constraints that we're being placed under with current guidance around the number of students that we're allowed to put on a bus. And that's not something that we do control. That's something where we're waiting for a change in guidance that allows us to have more flexibility.
And Ms. Moore, if I can add, and Dr. Martin, if you allow it, I think just to extend on the virtual academy question and just to be clear to our families that are listening, I think first of all, to be clear, we share the concerns that you've articulated, Dr. Martin, but at the same time, it's why it's so important and critical for us to continue, as we have since July, to message to our families that when making a very tough decision between the virtual academy potentially and some type of in-person return, plans change. And as you have articulated on a couple of occasions over the course of the last couple of meetings, I think we recognize we're experiencing in real time right now an example of, back in July and August, a lot of families perhaps were thinking that when we return to instruction, it would be under the auspices and the parameters laid out by a Plan B in rotations. Some may not have expected to go pretty quickly into Plan A. And so that's an example of why we've got to be really cautious about articulating concrete plan in October, when the reality is we all recognize those plans can and have changed. And so what we've tried really hard to do and will continue to do is to try to make clear to our families that if they're looking for some level of instructional continuity in terms of the learning environment for the duration, in this instance, of the spring semester, then the virtual academy is their best option. If parents and families are looking for some level, some potential, some possibility to return to in-person instruction, we can tell you right now, based on the assumptions that have been laid out, and which potentially can translate into plans pretty shortly, which aren't altogether different than what's being implemented right now in real time or will be in the next few weeks per semester. For those families that are looking to return their students in person, the virtual academy is not the option that they would choose. They would stay with kind of the Plan D transition model, recognizing that things can and have and probably will again change in terms of the plans that we make. And I think we completely, understand and feel that tension and that catch-22 that I think you're articulating, where parents rightfully, right, and I'm one of them, want to know what the plan is so they can make a decision. And likewise, to some degree, we have to kind of know what the decision is from parents so that we can build a plan around that. And I think that's the tug back and forth with that tension. And I think I would just reemphasize to our families as they're making decisions, we can provide you with kind of the roadmap for where we're going based on what we know right now. What we can't do is predict where we're going to end up a couple of months, several months down the road. And I think you mentioned specifically also the 2 cohort rotations. I don't think there's any doubt that all of us on the planning side would much prefer a 2 cohort rotation, perhaps nice and cleanly embedded within 1 week, where like some other districts are doing 2 days in, 1 day remote for all, and then 2 days in with the next cohort. I think we absolutely would prefer that for a lot of reasons. But it's something that right now, based on the numbers and the data and the feedback that we gathered from schools for first semester, it was just an impossibility to be able to maintain the requirements laid out by the state for our 6th through 12th graders and be able to do that. However, I think we do want to have a contingency for if in the event those parameters change, I think we would look to be able to mobilize something like that if the possibility exists. So I just wanted to add that additional layer of context while at the same time acknowledging, I think, the catch-22 that you've described and talked about.
And I appreciate that. I mean, I understand the difficulty. I'm really not a fan of the optics. At the same time, I recognize this is a staff decision, and the board did not make this decision. So I think the public needs to recognize that. A second point, and I appreciate, again, Mr. Hegarty raised the issue of the before and after school care. This is something I've also heard from several families. I guess a concern I have is looking at this a little bit through an equity lens. Are there some schools where we need to say there needs to be a before and after school program in these schools? I'm just a little concerned with just leaving it completely up to the school. Are there some places where we need to strategically look and say there really needs to be before and after school in these locations?
You mean not necessarily because parents are requesting it, but for academic support, or?
It could be all of the above, right? I mean, it could be academic support. We also know that parent requests come from areas of the county where there is already more active parent engagement, but that doesn't necessarily reflect where all the highest need is. We do have communities where we still don't have the strongest relationship between parents and schools. And so are those communities going to be advocating for the programs that they may need? And that's where I'm just asking, can we look strategically and say, here are some places where there absolutely should be a before and after school program?
So partially getting at what you're asking, we're asking schools, if you have not traditionally had a before and after school program, is it because you haven't had enough families who requested it that allowed you to handle it financially? You have to have a certain number of students sign up. So we've asked them that question so that if they do have some families but not enough to make it financially viable, what support can the district provide to help get that started? Either our support from the district level or support with the partner who might provide it. So we don't want, for the Y, for example, for the number of students who might request it at a school, if it's not enough to make it financially viable for them, how do we partner to make it financially viable for those who request it? So that's the first step towards what you're talking about. But a more longer-term vision, strategic sort of plan around how before and after school programs are located and supported is not a part of what we're doing right now, but it is certainly a part of something that we need to look at.
Well, and that's, I guess, what I'm suggesting. We've all said this, right? All the inequities across the system were challenging pre-COVID. Now it's only become even more challenging.
Right.
And last year, in some of the work we were doing with the RTI group, before and after school programs, daycares, that was a significant issue that needed to be addressed if we were going to deal with some of the equity and racial and integration issues between our schools. And it just feels to me like, as we look at before and after school programs, we really do need to look at this through the equity lens.
Thank you, Dr. Martin. I'm going to need to move on to the next board member. Mrs. Kushner.
Oh, thank you, Chair Sutton, and I'll try to, in the interest of time, be brief. Thank you for the update, Superintendent Moore. I was especially excited to hear that central office staff will be utilized at this time, because I think the 26th and onward is going to be really stressful times in our schools, and so I think it's strategic to have our central office staff strategically placed in schools. So thank you for and for the area superintendents to do visits this week. I appreciate that they're going to be at all of our elementary schools. And for trying to go through my questions that weren't already answered, but for student achievement topic, just looking forward, I think we've heard a lot about, we focus so much on remote learning. I hope we are also taking time to long-term look at what are the successes of remote learning and how can we maintain those going forward, because this storm's going to run out of rain and we're going to hopefully be at some point able to look back and see what have we learned from remote learning, but also how are we in the short-term planning and in the long-term planning for the gaps that have occurred with our students, particularly those with special education needs, those for whom remote learning was not a good fit for their education needs. I hope we're working really long-term to have a plan with parents and families to address those issues. So I hope we can look at that in student achievement. But also with exemplars, are we sharing ideas? Do we have a mechanism for sharing ideas, say with the checklist booklet that we saw in the video, or having some of our specialists push into classes or teach virtually? What's the mechanism for sharing across schools so that we're sharing what are emerging best practices?
Right. So I'm going to see if Edward or Drew have any insight here, because I'm guessing we got those examples from schools.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. I think several structures, Ms. Kushner, where we've tried to make an effort to, as you've indicated, right, when we've identified a best practice that seems to really be having a positive impact in one location, I think part of our responsibility, quite frankly, as district leaders, is try to make sure that to the degree possible that practice is shared with others that might be able to implement the same thing. And so we've got structures in addition to sharing and having conversations with principals in small group meetings, either by region or level. We've also got groups like our assistant principals for instruction at the high school level, instructional facilitators, coaches, and other groups where we try at multiple layers of the organization to try to identify some of these practices, also share them out in multiple layers so that, if there's an effective strategy that's being used in one location, we want to do our best to make sure it's being shared at others as well, recognizing that there's always going to be individual nuance and specific parameters and situations that might make it difficult to apply across the entire district. But those are some examples of how we do try to, go beyond just sending out a mass email, right? I think there's a lot of need to ensure that we're having discussions. We've tried to invite principals to share with their peers and colleagues. We've built into every weekly principals meeting that we've had pretty much since March now. Our area superintendents have worked really hard to build really tight-knit professional learning teams and small groups. And a lot of their conversations are focused on exactly what you just described, which is, hey, here's the problem that we're all facing. What are you doing, and what are you doing in your building to help address that? So we will.
Thank you, Mr. Cook. Thank you, Chair Sutton.
Ms. Johnson.
Thank you. I tried to go through and make sure I'm not asking anything that has been asked, and I echo the things that you all did discuss that I'm sure were on all of our lists, so I will skip those. There are only 3 questions that I don't think were asked, and 2 of them may have an easier answer. One of them is, and you talked about this earlier in your statements, Superintendent Moore, which I have several parents, as you know, asking about doing what they always do for their elementary school, hopefully middle school parents, of buying supplies. Do we have an answer if they can buy the spray and paper towels, since the wipes are harder to reach?
Yeah, so I'm going to see if Don is still on, and to just reiterate, the question is, there are parents who are interested and have access to Oxivir, either wipes or the spray, which I know we're transitioning to the spray. Would that be an acceptable thing for PTAs to purchase for schools? We've gotten so far away from, the
Pencil
normal
sharpeners
sort of
and glue.
So.
I've got to say that, yes, it's a good idea, but I'm a little bit nervous about it. These are chemicals, after all, so that I'd like to be sure that before they do that they share information with M&O so we can make sure that even though it has the same name, that it's the same product and it is a safe product for us to use. So
Don, may I suggest?
Good idea, but I'm just a little nervous that we do check it first.
So can they follow up with I didn't even know we had COVID care coordinators at all of our schools, but all the PTAs who reached out said they had already talked to their COVID care coordinators. So can you just, I guess, communicate that to the COVID care coordinators? Because it sounds like all of these parents who reached out to me were already in contact with them.
Right. I think what we'll need to do is provide the school level with a list of options that they could engage in so that they know exactly what it is.
Perfect.
Yeah, so we'll look at that.
Perfect. And it seems like the coordinator at the school base is already working, so
Right.
if that information goes to them, that should be fine. The second question is, for students who do receive any services from folks who work at Central Services, you also mentioned that they may be able to go to the school since their base is here at Central Services, but they may be remote. Do we have a process in which we're going to make sure parents know? So let's say their speech therapy, it may still be happening remote even if they're back in the buildings.
Okay.
As an
so-
example of a Central Service staff that would be traveling to a school.
For their normal disposition of duties.
Right.
So,
It's more about the student services,
Right.
which, because I'm going to go with parents are assuming that if their
Right.
child is in person, then all their services are going to be
Right.
moved back to in person.
I'm going to see if Karen is online that can respond to the specific question of if students are in person at the school, are their services that are delivered now going to be in person at the school, or will some students still be receiving some services virtually? And I don't know how much that depends on which kind of week they're in.
Thank you for that question. So what we have directed staff to do is to provide services in person to students when students are in person, and then provide those services remotely. The only exception to that would be if a staff member has been granted an accommodation for their own COVID need. And in that circumstance, they would continue to provide the service remotely, whether they were, whether the student was in person or in their rotation out in remote learning.
So I'm going to try not to make an assumption so you can just answer the question. So that does or does not mean that Central Service staff, because we've only talked about building level planning and what's going to happen at the building. So does that mean there's also been a sense of training and planning knowledge of Central Services staff around all of this?
Oh, absolutely. That's a great question as well. And that includes not just the training, but also enhanced PPE for those staff participants.
Okay, perfect. And last question, which you can give to me, hopefully. We should have some information on this by our student achievement. And of course, we're all getting a number of requests from parents who chose Plan B, but are now being rejected to switch to Plan A. Can we, and I know this is asking a big, but so you can tell me no, Dr. McFarland or Mr. Cook, is there any way that we can have a sense of how many students or families are not able to be granted the switch to Virtual Academy if they chose Plan B on Monday or anytime soon? So how many are being rejected? Because we're getting a lot of emails, but that doesn't give me a sense of what the actual data
Right.
for the entire district is.
So I would say then it's appropriate to maybe try to include that as part of the Virtual Academy update on Monday at Student Achievement, to have an understanding, because that gives us a little time to check with our schools to see what number of requests they're getting and how they're granting or not granting and how that's working.
Okay.
Did you catch that, Drew? Edward?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am, we have it.
Thank you. I think everybody else asked all the other questions. Thank you.
All right. Others, quick one?
Well, the questions have been asked. I just want to reiterate, and the superintendent said this at least twice in her presentation, secondary school, there is no option for us to choose more in-person instruction for grades 6 through 12 than Plan B provides. And Plan B currently is a 3-week rotation for 1/3 of the students in the building at a time. So that's the option that the staff that this board has approved, and staff has said that we can now implement it in second semester based on these assumptions, which includes the governor not making a different announcement as we move forward and things like that. So I appreciate the presentation, the comprehensive nature of the presentation, the questions from my colleagues as well. I would share the concern that November 4 may still be very tight for families to make a decision on the virtual academy question. And that would be my one request, that we look at a couple more days after the 4th. I think also it may be that the choice of courses that are going to be available might drive the choice of which program the student wants to take, because one of the challenges we have today is we've got Plan B and virtual kids in the same course with the same teacher.
They're intertwined.
So it's going to be a challenge to provide the 150, 160 courses in each portion of virtual academy that relates to a particular high school, and to do it in the traditional, in the Plan B plan. So we've got to have some creative thinking about how we're going to accomplish that with low incidence courses, that maybe some cross high school pollination or something. I think that's going to be the question for parents as they look at the option.
I second that, Mr. Fletcher. Thanks.
We are a little beyond time, but I want to make sure that, Superintendent Moore, you have the feedback that you needed, you're looking for in the presentation of this plan. Obviously, 2 points that I've heard raised are with regard to the date of the virtual academy, understanding both the sensitivity around timelines for principals for planning, but allowing parents and families to have enough time to make a selection and enough meat on the bones, if you will, I guess, for them to make an intelligent discussion. So I don't know if there's anything that you want to respond to, or where do we go from here in terms of a next step, in terms of coming back to the board in a future meeting, or moving that, or...
Okay. So, for the virtual academy deadline, I think what I'll say is we'll continue to discuss it. And I think that should, for some reason, we have to, as staff, revise the proposal from what our current planning assumption is, that I think would certainly be a reason that you would want to provide more time, because it's different than what we have said is our planning assumption. But at this point, I'm pretty confident that our planning assumption will be our recommendation for 6/12. And then let's kind of see what the feedback looks like, what we get from principals as we follow up with them as well, and we'll let you know. I appreciate all the questions today. I do think if there are additional questions that we didn't get to, or things that come to you, to please let us know. And that really is the purpose of two-stepping this with a proposal that people actually see, that then there's time also to review and discuss prior to voting at the next board meeting. Unless you feel like you're ready to vote on November 10th. So, because these are planning assumptions, not the actual proposal, although, I just want to make sure that the proposal we bring you isn't changed from the planning assumptions before you have to vote. Been there, done that.
So I was going to outline that in my comments, that we would be looking at a possible vote at our next meeting in November, depending upon when that is, on this proposal regarding the spring semester. So today was an opportunity to share that with board members coming from staff, and giving us ample time over the next couple of weeks to get feedback, input, reaction from parents, the community. Also, hearing from our principals about that input, which we're assuming that you will share with us, and then perhaps as soon as our next meeting, making a decision and approving that proposal. Mrs. Cash.
If what we hear tonight is different, I don't want to vote on it next time. I want to vote on it, but I want to be sure that I'm not, the suggestion about the deadline being extended, I agree with what Mr. Haggerty said about us going, but I don't necessarily want to leave here thinking that we all want the deadline extended past that, because at the last board meeting, we put a significant heavy lift on our principals out there, and if we give them very little time before the holidays to prepare for what we're asking them to do, I know a lot of parents want more time, but I'm really worried about what our principals have to do in a short amount of time. So I just wanted to add that I don't necessarily, that wasn't a question. I think we all have to weigh in on that one.
All right. So no further discussion. We will consider this work session to be adjourned, and we will make preparation to move to our board meeting. It is 5:40, so we'll give us, we've been sitting here since about 3 o'clock, so we'll give people time to take care of their comfort, and we'll get back in 10 minutes, so we'll start at about 5:50.